Hear now a reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but they doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded. And remember, I am with you always, even to the close of the age." Please pray with me. Holy One, we are so grateful that you have given us sufficient life and breath to rise from our sleep, to dress, to get in the car or walk. 100 steps were taken today to come to this place to worship you. And for those who are worshiping from home, to fool with the computer, to make sure everything was connected, to find that cup of coffee. And for those in C2 across the way, we have gathered as your people from far and wide to sing your praises. We've come hungry, waiting to be filled. We've come full, eager to celebrate. In all things, God, we ask that you would open our eyes to see and our ears to hear your word, that it might be made alive in and through us, not only for our sake, but for the world. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of every heart be an acceptable offering to you. We give it to you, Lord, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Good morning, church. Good morning, C2. It's good to see you this morning. Peter, glad that you're with us today. James, welcome. We've got some new folks over there in C2 this morning, and we're so glad that you're part of the band, and grateful to all the band and all of you for the music that you bring as well every Sunday morning. We're really blessed by all of you as musicians. Jesus said, "Go and make disciples." How do you make a disciple? How do you make a singer? How do you make a choir? How do you make a tennis player? How do you make something of someone? Well, let me tell you a story. We'll start and end today with stories. Saturday was cleaning day when my boys were little, and every Saturday morning, sons Joshua and Micah chose 2 jars from the difficult job, from the easy job jar, and 1 from the difficult job jar. I got that straight. They pulled the slips of paper out without being able to see what they said, so it was fair, and that's really important if you have adolescent boys. The easy jobs were generally the same. Vacuum the house, dust the furniture, mow the lawn. They knew how to do it. They had that. The hard jobs changed every week. Clean up after the dog in the yard, clean the outside shed, clean the gutters. Whatever they wanted to do for the weekend, play video games, go to a friend's house, they knew the answer would be no until all the chores were accomplished. I remember the time when one of the boys decided to cut corners. And as cleaning the room was always on everybody's list, including mine, he shoved everything into the closet, leaning on it to make sure it closed, and everything under the bed. He would have gotten away with this predictable trick if it weren't for the fact that his shirt was hanging out from the corner underneath the bed, and he was busted. So I made him clean his room. He asked for a trash can, and I brought a little one from the bathroom. No, I need a garbage can from the garage, so we arranged it. Well, I got otherwise occupied with my chores for the morning, and when I circled back around, I praised everybody for a job well done. We all had checked off our completed jobs, and we were off to play. I didn't realize until the following Tuesday, as the trash truck pulled away from the street, what he had done. I watched with dismay as the trash man threw his brand new football up and down in the air. He threw out everything: dirty clothes, clean clothes, books, magazines, food wrappers, and even his new football, rather than put anything away. So much for making someone become a room cleaner. I can tell you, though, that boy's room was clean. Today's Bible stories both talk about, first, that one time when God commanded someone to get up and go somewhere, and that one time when Jesus directed his disciples to do something. When Jesus told the disciples to go and make disciples of all nations, he didn't tell them how it could be done. He left it all to them to figure it out, as he leaves it to us to figure out how to be faithful to whatever it is that God asks us to do. First, way back in the beginning in Genesis, we heard this story about God's interaction with Abram, later named Abraham. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless all the families of the earth through you. God said to Abram, go. And the next verse says that Abram and Sarai went. Well, this was no easy thing. Those of you who have been in Vero for 4 generations or so know that if you are still hanging out with the people you went to school with in kindergarten and the ones you graduated from high school with, and you can still spend Sundays with your family on the weekends, to leave all that and go somewhere else to a new place and never see those friends again would be really, really hard. But Abram packed up his pod that was sitting on the driveway, that container, you all know about that, and then he ordered up a bunch of cattle trucks because he had to load up all of his cattle and sheep and goats and everything else. And then he had to get a whole lot of minivans going because he took his Aunt Martha and his Uncle Fred and everybody loaded up, and they moved from Florida to Montana. How is it that God made him become a sojourner to a new land? Well, in this case, God was able to do that because God promised him the one thing he wanted more than anything else in his whole life, which was an heir. God said, if you will do this for me, I will bless you with heirs as numerous as the stars. And he gave him a legacy and a life. Now fast forward a couple of thousand years to Jesus' last words to his disciples as risen Christ that come at the end of Matthew. Here Jesus appeared to his grieving disciples after his resurrection with instructions on what to do next. Jesus said, go, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The confused and grieving disciples did what Jesus asked them to do because they respected him and they loved him sacrificially. They would lay down their life for him. So like Abram so long ago, they got up and went. Peter, Andrew, Matthew, and Bartholomew to the region of the Black Sea, Thomas, Thaddeus, and Simeon to the Canaanite to Parthia, and John and Philip to Asia Minor. We wouldn't have been surprised to have read instead that after Jesus died, the disciples were grieving deeply. Then they picked up the pieces of their lives and simply went back to doing whatever they had been doing before they ever met the man. Yet they seem to understand, as we do, that sometimes there's a cataclysmic shift in our lives, and there's no going back to the way things were before. We're in a time like that now. There's only getting stuck where we are and lamenting how things used to be or going forward. The disciples who followed Jesus in his lifetime became the apostles who went out and shared the story of Jesus because he had forever changed their lives. Having received the unconditional love of God and been changed by it, they wanted others to have what they had. They went because they loved Jesus. We'll do difficult things, even sacrificial things for those we love. We're telling these stories this morning because the history of Christianity depended on the disciples doing what Jesus asked them to do, or we wouldn't be here now. And as it turns out, the future of Christianity in this country depends on our doing where God calls us next. We know this because just this week, the Pew Institute put out their latest research on religion, which continues to chronicle a going on now 60-year decline in Christian churches in America, which have dropped precipitously post-COVID, with the average church attendance at about 60, some 50 to 75% of where they were previously. And the prediction of the Pew Institute, with 4 different possible trajectories, is that by the middle of this century, Christianity in the United States will be a minority faith. For the first time in our history, Christianity is at risk of becoming the minority faith in the United States. Now, make no mistake, Christianity won't die. This is God's work in the world. It's alive and well in Africa and South America. But it's in serious and precipitous decline here. So never has there been a time in my lifetime, in my grandparents' lifetime, in my great-great-grandparents' lifetime, when it was more important to make disciples who will follow the way of Jesus Christ. God said go, and Abram went. Jesus said do something, and the apostles did. When the disciples went out into the world, they did what Jesus asked them to do by telling stories of the love of God, by telling stories of the promises of God, by reminding people that they were forgiven and set free to live an abundant life. Then they showed people by example what love looked like. They invited them to house church, those fledgling gatherings of seekers who came together in people's homes. They broke bread together. They brought their offerings. They became generous people. They sang psalms. They prayed. They grew to love one another as Christ had loved their leaders when Jesus was still alive. They committed to following the way of Jesus, thousands of them. They were made disciples by love. This Christian faith is a relational faith. When God compels us to go and do, it is for our sake, but it's also for the sake of one another and for the glory of God. It's also for the sake of the church, for the future of the church. In our tradition, we don't bludgeon people into the kingdom of God. We don't threaten anybody with some bad thing that will happen to them. We don't make them afraid or try to manipulate them into doing something. That can cause irreparable harm and suffering. Our path forward and through difficult times is love that we extend to one another as Christ loved us. When we want someone to live, we tell them the truth with love. We model the abundant life God wants for us. When we're faithful, others will see our joy and want more of that too. God never makes it our business to tell somebody else what they should do. No one, and I mean no one, wants our opinion about how they should live. No one. If you found an except you can tell me on the way out if you've known somebody that was really welcomed your opinion about their life. Yet when we share our life-changing story out of love, others may gain the courage to change their life too. This happens all the time if you watch all those Weight Watchers ads and other programs for weight loss and getting healthy on television and on YouTube and on the pop-up on your computer. There's always a before and after picture, but the most important thing is the testimony about the person who had surgery and then could barely walk a block And then they decided to walk a block and a half, and then they started eating vegetables and less French fries. They tell a story. It's their testimony. They're evangelists for health. They don't try to make somebody follow their path, but they tell the story of how their life is changed in such a way that other people might be inspired to change their life too. They are disciples, and they are making disciples who are willing to get healthy and save their life. We make disciples when we're faithful disciples ourselves. We make disciples by sharing stories about what we love that's changed our lives. When we love someone or something, we can't help talking about it. Now, some of you know that I'm pretty addicted to ice cream. And when I find a new place that makes my heart sing, I'll tell you all about it. You know what that's like too, because when you've been to the theater and it's been fabulous, you've rushed to tell a friend you should go see this before it's gone. Or you've discovered a little secret fabulous place to play that game that you love so much. You're going to tell your friends so they can come with you too. The exception to this storytelling seems to be those who fish, who can be pretty tight-lipped about the best bend in the river or fishing hole. When it comes to fishing, there may not be many apostles. We make disciples by how we love, and others may notice our example. When I preside at weddings, I often tell the couple that even though this day is for them, it's not just about them. The flower girl who's 5, the ring bearer who's 3, their niece, their nephew, that groomsman, this bridesmaid, they're all watching to see how it's done. How's this going to turn out? Are they going to stay in love? Are they going to be committed through hard times? The couple getting married is not just for their own sake. They are creating covenanted marriages all around them, disciples of love, by how they live out the covenant vows that they are about to make. I think all of us who have done weddings have found that at most weddings we do, somebody decides that day, they meet the person that they're going to marry someday, or they decide to get engaged. I've more than once set the wedding date with a couple who now are nudged to move forward by what they've witnessed. We can't make someone follow the way of Jesus any more than we can make someone come to church or do anything else. Nevertheless, when we share our stories of how we experience the presence of God in our life with other people, when we get excited and tell somebody about an answered prayer, or when we invite someone to join us on a mission project or an event here at the church, we participate in the holy work of making disciples. This is critical work that God is calling us to do. I'd like to close this morning with a story, as I began with one just a few minutes ago, that reminds us of how disciples are made, of the power of faithfulness as disciples ourselves that changes life. It's a surprising story, one you may have heard before. This is a Japanese story of Hachiko, an Aikido dog remembered for his remarkable loyalty to his owner. Hachiko was born on a farm in 1923 and lived there in the Japanese countryside for the first year of his life until he was adopted by a professor at the Tokyo Imperial University. Soon, Hachiko would meet his new owner. I have to look again. Hidesaburo, and forgive me if I pronounced it wrong, Ueno. Every day, Hachiko walked his master to the train station for the morning commute to work. And every day, Hachiko came back to meet his master at the train after his owner's commute home. This continued until May 21st, 1925, when Ueno died of a cerebral hemorrhage while giving a lecture at the university. From then on until his death on March 8, 1925, this dog, Hachiko, would return to the Shibuya station every day at precisely the same time to await Ueno's return. Fellow commuters who had previously not engaged with one another at all, didn't even look at each other on the train, began to form a community. They found a common bond through this remarkable animal. They began talking with one another. They brought him treats as he waited. One student of Ueno followed the dog home to where he now lived with the master gardener and learned the story of his daily commitment. This student of Ueno published the story, and it spread like wildfire throughout the land. There were photos in the newspaper, in magazines, on television. During his lifetime, the dog was held up in Japanese culture as an example of loyalty and fidelity that eventually changed the heart of the nation. Teachers taught children the story of love and loyalty to encourage them to a life of love and loyalty too. Well, after his death, the dog continues to be remembered in worldwide popular culture with statues, 2 movies, I've seen both of them, and books that pass on his legacy of love. Hachiko waited for his master as we wait on ours. He made disciples of love and loyalty. He boldly lived his faithfulness for all to see, for all to witness. These times call for such devoted faith. God now says, go. Make disciples by loyally following Jesus. Make disciples by actively loving your neighbor. Make disciples by bravely telling stories of all that God has done for you. And then wait and see what God will yet do. May it be so. Amen.